Chapter 1. 7 years. 2,557 days. Ilara counted them, not in bitterness, but in the way a stonemason counts the blocks in a wall. It was a fact, a solid and unchangeable thing. For 7 years she had lived in the Moonstone Keep as the king's ward. The title was a polite fiction, a silken cover for a box whose contents no one, least of all Ilara, understood. She was a ghost in these hallowed halls, a whisper of a girl who had arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and a silence so profound it seemed to swallow the sounds around her. In a world of werewolves, of heightened senses and scent-marked territories, Ilara was a void. She had no scent. She projected no emotion a wolf could read. To them, she was a placid lake in a world of raging rivers, and it made them deeply, unnervingly uncomfortable. They called her the Hollow One when they thought she couldn't hear. King Theron, the alpha of alphas, the ruler of the northern clans, had brought her here. He had looked at her once upon her arrival, his silver eyes, the color of a winter sky before a storm, assessing her for a long, silent moment. Then he had turned to his steward and given the order for her placement. She will be housed in the East Wing. See to her needs. And that was that. In 7 years, he had spoken perhaps 200 words to her, most of them public pleasantries, so brief they were over before she could form a reply. He kept her at a precise arm's length. She was fed, clothed, and housed, a living, breathing piece of the castle's inanimate collection. An oddity, a puzzle he had apparently lost interest in solving. Tonight was the 7th anniversary of her arrival, a date that meant nothing to anyone but her. It coincided with the feast of the first hunt, a grand affair where the long tables of the great hall groaned under the weight of roasted game and spiced wine. The air was thick with the smells of pine, roasting meat, and the complex layered scents of hundreds of powerful wolves. To Ilara, it was just noise, a cacophony of smells that she registered as information, but not with the instinctual, gut-level understanding of the shifters around her. She sat, as always, at the far end of a lesser table, tucked away near a tapestry depicting a long-dead king wrestling a great bear. It was her usual spot, a place of benign neglect. From here, she could observe without being observed. She watched Lord Valerius, the king's cousin, hold court at the center of the room. He was handsome, powerful, and cruel, with a tongue as sharp as any blade. His gaze swept the room, and for a horrifying moment, it landed on her. A slow, malicious smile spread across his face. 7 years, he boomed, his voice carrying easily over the din. He raised his goblet. The hall quieted, anticipating a toast to the hunt, to the king. 7 years since our great King Theron showed his peculiar mercy. A cold knot formed in Ilara's stomach. She kept her eyes on the dregs of wine in her cup, her knuckles white where she gripped the stem. Valerius continued, his eyes still fixed on her. He brought a stray into our midst, a hollow thing, without scent or spirit, a blank page in a library of epics. Laughter, sharp and derisive, rippled through the nearby tables. We have housed her, fed her, clothed this. Nothing. For what? A monument to a soft heart, or a reminder that even the greatest among us can have a moment of inexplicable folly. Each word was a stone, and she was drowning under their weight. Humiliation, hot and acidic, rose in her throat. She didn't dare look up. She could feel the stares, hundreds of them, ranging from pity to contempt. This was the culmination of her 7 years of invisibility, to finally be seen, only to be flayed open for sport. "To the king's ward," Valerius sneered, lifting his goblet higher. "May her 8th year be as useful as her first 7. The insult was clear. Useless. A burden. A folly. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. No one would drink to that, but no one would challenge Lord Valerius either. They just watched, waiting for her to break, to cry, to run. She would do none of those things. She would sit here and bear it, another stone in the wall of her existence. Then, a sound cut through the tension. It was the scrape of a chair on stone. A heavy, deliberate sound from the head of the hall. King Theron was on his feet. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't moved with his typical lupine speed. He simply stood, a monolith of contained power, and the entire hall fell into a silence so absolute it was like the world had lost its breath. His silver eyes were not on his cousin. They were on Elara. He saw the rigid line of her spine. He saw the trembling of the goblet in her hand, a tremor she fought to control. He saw the fierce, painful pride that kept her head bowed, but not broken. He saw everything, and for the first time in 7 years, he closed the distance between them. He moved down the length of the great hall, his heavy boots echoing in the stillness. The court parted before him like the sea before a god. He didn't stop until he stood directly before her table. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She forced herself to look up at him. His face was a mask of cold neutrality, carved from granite. But his eyes held an intensity she had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It was something else, something sharp and focused, like a hawk spotting its prey from a mile high. He did not speak to Valerius. He did not address the silent, gaping court. He spoke only to her, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards, meant for her ears alone. Elara. Her name. He had never said her name. Not to her. The sound of it from his lips was a shock, a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. He extended a hand. It was a large hand, scarred and calloused, the hand of a warrior and a king. It was not a demand. It was an offering, an anchor in a storm of humiliation. "Walk with me," he said. It was not a question. Slowly, as if in a dream, she placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and utterly steady. He curled his fingers around hers and turned, leading her from the hall. He walked with a slow, deliberate pace, forcing the entire assembly of northern nobles to watch him escort the hollow one, the nothing, from the room with more care than he would show a visiting queen. As they passed Lord Valerius, the king paused for a fraction of a second. He did not look at his cousin. He simply stopped, his presence a crushing weight, and the scent of his silent, lethal fury filled the air, a promise of a reckoning to come. Then he moved on, pulling Elara gently in his wake, leaving a stunned and terrified court behind them. The great doors of the hall boomed shut, and they were alone in the cold, torchlit corridor. He did not release her hand. He led her through the winding passages of the keep, his silence as profound as the one she carried within herself. He led her not to her sparse rooms in the east wing, but toward the royal spire, a part of the castle she had only ever seen from the courtyards below. He stopped before a set of heavy oak doors carved with the royal crest. He released her hand only to push one open, revealing a suite of rooms that stole her breath. A fire roared in a vast stone hearth, casting a warm glow over rich tapestries, polished wood furniture, and shelves overflowing with books. It was larger than her entire life. He turned to her, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "This is yours now," he said. Ilara found her voice, a dry, reedy thing. I don't understand. I have been a fool," King Theron said, and the admission seemed to cost him something. His silver eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something beyond command and control. It looked like regret. "For 7 years, I have watched you. I have tested you with silence. I believed it was for your safety. For mine, I was wrong." He took a step closer. He was so tall, he seemed to block out the rest of the world. "Valerius speaks of folly. My folly was not in bringing you here, Ilara. My folly was in leaving you to fight your battles alone." That night, on the 7th anniversary of her silent exile, the king who had spoken 200 words to her in 7 years would speak 200 more, and each one would dismantle the world she thought she knew. Chapter 2. The warmth of the fire was a stark contrast to the ice that had taken root in Ilara's veins. She stood frozen in the center of the lavish room, her mind struggling to catch up with the evening's trajectory. From public pariah to resident of the royal spire in the span of 10 minutes. It was a dizzying, terrifying ascent. Why? The word was barely a whisper, but in the quiet of the room it sounded like a shout. Theron moved to the hearth, his back to her as he stared into the flames. The firelight played over the hard lines of his face, making him look like one of the ancient kings carved into the mountainside. "Because there is a sickness in this keep," he said, his voice low and grave. "A poison, not of the body, but of the spirit. It began a month ago. Guards on the outer wall, driven to madness. A rage they cannot control, followed by a stupor from which they do not wake. The castle healers are baffled. They find no toxin, no wound." He turned back to face her, his gaze pinning her in place. "But they all describe the same thing before the madness takes them. A scent. Sweet, like night-blooming jasmine, but with something cloying underneath. Something rotten." Ilara's mind raced. In a world of shifters, scent was everything. It was identity, emotion, intent. An unidentifiable scent causing madness was a terrifying weapon. "And you think I can help?" she asked, incredulous. "I am, what they say, hollow. I have no scent. My senses are dull compared to yours." "That is precisely why you can help," he corrected, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You are not dull, Ilara. You are clear. We are deafened by a constant storm of sensory information. We filter, we interpret, we are influenced. You are not. You see what is, not what is scented. You hear what is said, not the emotion layered beneath it. You are the only one in this entire keep whose perception I can trust to be untainted." He had been watching her. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. His distance wasn't neglect. It was observation. For 7 years, he had been studying her like a scholar, studies a rare text, learning her language while she believed he didn't even know her name. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I want you to be my eyes and my ears," he said. "You will attend the small council meetings. You will review the guards' reports. You will walk the castle with my authority. You will tell me what you see, the detail another might miss, the flicker of an eye, the tremor in a hand, the lie that has no scent." He paused, his expression grim. "Someone is doing this. Someone within these walls. And I will find them." He was giving her a purpose, a dangerous, terrifying purpose that would thrust her from the shadows into the very center of the court's attention, into Lord Valerius's path. As if reading her thoughts, he added, "You will not be unprotected. My personal guard, Kale, will be stationed outside your door. No one will enter without your permission. No one will trouble you." His eyes darkened. "I will deal with my cousin. His insult to you tonight was an insult to me. He will not make that mistake again." The finality in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. It was a promise of retribution, delivered with the cold certainty of a winter frost. The next few days were a blur of disorientation. Alara moved into the new rooms, her few meager possessions looking lost and out of place amidst the opulence. Kyle, a mountain of a man with a scarred face and silent demeanor, became her shadow, his presence a constant, reassuring weight. True to the king's word, the courtiers, who had once openly sneered, now offered strained, respectful nods. They gave her a wide berth, their fear of the king's wrath a more potent force than their disdain for her. She began her new duties, sitting in a chair placed just behind the king's during the small council meetings. The lords and advisors spoke of troop movements, grain stores, and border disputes. Alara listened, not just to their words, but to the rhythm of their speech, the way they held their hands, the subtle shifts in their posture when the king addressed them. She filled pages with notes, her script precise and clear, documenting everything. Theron never addressed her during the meetings, but she felt his awareness of her. A subtle shift in his position to ensure she had a clear view, the way his eyes would flick to her for a bare second after a contentious point was made. They developed a silent language, a strange and intimate dance of observation. One evening, after a long and grueling council session, she returned to her rooms to find a book lying on the small reading table by the fire. It was a rare volume of Northern histories, one she had seen in the Royal Library but had never dared to ask for. There was no note. There was no explanation. It was simply there, an offering. Another night a tray was brought with her meal, and on it was a small bowl of winter berries, a delicacy usually reserved for the royal table. She had mentioned her fondness for them once, a passing comment to a kitchen maid 4 years ago. He had remembered. Or he had learned. She wasn't sure which was more unsettling. These small, deliberate acts of kindness were more unnerving than his 7 years of silence had ever been. The silence was a wall, she understood. This was something else. A bridge being built, stone by careful stone, across a chasm of mistrust. She walked it with trepidation, convinced each step might be her last. Her investigation began to yield small, strange details. She cross-referenced the guards' reports, the ones who had fallen to the madness. The incidents were not random. They all occurred on the western battlement, and always on the night of a new moon. Furthermore, a review of the castle's supply ledgers showed that Lord Valerius's personal household had been ordering unusually large quantities of certain herbs known to be used in alchemy and scentcraft. It was thin, circumstantial, but it was a thread. She brought her findings to Theron late one night. He listened in silence in his private study, his silver eyes fixed on her face as she laid out the parchments on his massive oak desk. The room was quiet, filled only with the crackle of the fire and the soft rustle of paper. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled before him. "Valerius," he said, the name a low growl. "He has always been ambitious. He sees my lack of a mate, of an heir, as a weakness, an opportunity." "He is your cousin," Alara said softly. "Your blood." "Blood is not a bond," Theron replied, his voice hard. "Loyalty is a bond. Trust is a bond. He has neither from me." He rose from his chair and walked to the window, looking out over the moonlit courtyard. "This is good work, Alara. More than my entire council of spies has uncovered in a month." He turned back to her, and the distance between them seemed to shrink, the air growing thick with an unspoken tension. "You are not what they think you are," he said, his voice softer now. "You are not hollow. You are still, a deep pool of water that reflects the truth." Her heart skipped a beat. No one had ever described her as anything but empty. To be seen as deep, as still, as true, it was a revelation. She felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. It was in that moment that the warning bell began to toll, a frantic, clanging alarm from the western wall. Shouts echoed from the courtyard below. Theron was moving before the second peal, his body a blur of controlled speed. "Stay here," he commanded. "Lock the door." But Alara was already shaking her head. "The madness," she breathed. "It's happening again." She thought of the guards, of the sweet, cloying scent. "My lord, I am immune. If I can get close." He stopped, his hand on the door latch, and looked back at her. Conflict warred in his eyes, the instinct to protect her versus the urgent need to understand and stop the threat. "It is too dangerous." "It's more dangerous for you," she insisted, her voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even herself. "You can be affected. I cannot. Let me come. Let me help." For a heartbeat, he hesitated. Then he gave a sharp, decisive nod. "With me," he ordered, his voice all alpha, all king, "and do not leave my side." He threw open the door, and together they ran into the chaos, toward the sound of the tolling bell and the scent of jasmine and death. Chapter 3. The western battlement was a scene of controlled pandemonium. Guards in the king's livery formed a wide, cautious circle around one of their own, a young soldier named Reese, who was thrashing against the stone wall, his eyes wide with a feral madness. He snarled, his words slurring into nonsense, his hands clawing at his own face, as if trying to tear away his skin. The air was thick with the scent Theron had described. It was sickly sweet, an unnatural floral perfume that made Alara's nose wrinkle but did nothing more. To the shifters, however, it was clearly agony. She could see the strain on their faces, the way they held their arms over their noses and mouths, their control fraying at the edges. Theron was a rock in the swirling tide of panic. His presence alone seemed to calm the air, his authority an invisible shield. "Hold the perimeter," he roared, his voice cutting through the din. "No one engages him directly. Where is the healer?" "On his way, my king," Cale shouted, standing his ground near the epicenter of the chaos. "But the scent, it's stronger than ever before." Theron's eyes found Alara's. He saw no fear in her, only a focused intensity. She was watching Reese, her gaze analytical, her body poised. He gave a slight nod, a silent permission. Taking a deep breath, Alara stepped forward, moving out from behind the king's formidable shadow. A murmur of protest went through the guards. "My lady, no," Cale warned, reaching for her arm. "Let her pass," Theron commanded, his voice leaving no room for debate. Alara walked slowly, deliberately into the open space. As she drew closer to Reese, the sweet, poisonous scent seemed to thin around her, as if her very presence was a neutralizing agent. The guards nearest her straightened slightly, their breathing seeming to ease. They stared, first at her, then at the air around her, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and dawning awe. She stopped 10 feet from the maddened guard. "Reese," she said, her voice calm and even. The young man didn't seem to hear her. He slammed his head back against the stone, a low moan of pain escaping his lips. "Reese," she said again, taking another step. "Listen to my voice. Block out the noise. Just listen to me." She continued to speak, her tone low and steady, a constant, unwavering thread in the chaos of his mind. She spoke of the quiet of the library, the taste of fresh bread from the kitchens, the feel of clean snow on a winter morning. Simple, grounding things. As she spoke, she moved closer, step by careful step. The change was subtle at first. The frantic thrashing lessened. The snarling subsided into ragged, pained breaths. He still trembled, but the violent rage began to recede, like a fever breaking. Theron watched, his fists clenched at his sides, his entire being focused on her. He had hypothesized that her null nature might make her immune, but this was something more. She wasn't just unaffected. She was an antidote. Her stillness, the quality he had seen as a reflection of truth, was actively pushing back against the magical assault. The hollow one was a shield. Ilara was now only an arm's length from Reese. He had slumped to the ground, his back against the wall, his head in his hands. He was weeping now, deep, shuddering sobs of a man returning to himself from a nightmare. She knelt beside him, her movements gentle. She didn't touch him. She simply remained near, her quiet presence a sanctuary. The cloying sweetness in the air had almost completely dissipated in their immediate vicinity. The castle healer finally arrived, pushing through the circle of guards. He stopped short, staring at the scene before him. The calm that had descended, the weeping soldier, and the king's ward kneeling beside him as if she had commanded the storm to cease. Theron stepped forward. "See to him," he ordered the healer, his voice tight with a complex mix of emotions. He then turned his gaze to Ilara, who was rising to her feet. He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and, without a word, placed his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs tracing the line of her collarbone. It was a possessive, protective gesture, a silent declaration to all who watched. His eyes searched hers, filled with a raw, unguarded emotion she couldn't name. It looked like reverence. "You are a miracle," he breathed, the words a rough whisper for her alone. Before she could process the weight of his words, of his touch, Kale's sharp voice cut through the air. "My king!" Movement in the shadows, by the North Tower. Theron's head snapped up. He released Ilara, his posture shifting instantly from protector to predator. He followed Kale's gaze and saw a cloaked figure detaching itself from the deeper shadows of the tower, moving quickly toward the postern gate. "Valerius," Theron growled. The scent of the king's fury, cold and sharp as iron, finally overwhelmed the last vestiges of the jasmine poison. He came to watch his handiwork. With a speed that was barely human, Theron was gone, a gray streak flowing over the stone battlements in pursuit. Ilara watched him go, her heart pounding. The warmth of his hands still lingered on her shoulders. Kale moved to her side. "My lady, you should return to your rooms. It is not safe." But Ilara's eyes were fixed on the pouch Reese had dropped when he collapsed. It was small, made of dark leather, and something had spilled from it. A fine, shimmery powder. The source of the poison. She picked it up carefully, the fabric cool against her skin. "No," she said, her voice firm. "I am going to the Great Hall." The court was still gathered, though the celebratory atmosphere had long since evaporated, replaced by nervous murmuring. The alarm bell and the shouts had set everyone on edge. They turned as one when Alara entered, her expression determined, Kale flanking her like a guard of honor. She walked to the center of the room, her gaze sweeping over the assembled lords and ladies. Moments later, the great doors burst open again. King Theron strode in, dragging a struggling Lord Valerius by the collar of his fine velvet doublet. He threw the man to the floor at the foot of the dais. Valerius scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of outrage and fear. "Theron, have you gone mad? What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, trying to straighten his clothes and his dignity. "The meaning, cousin," Theron said, his voice dangerously soft, "is treason." He turned to the stunned court. "For weeks my guards have been driven to madness by a poisoned scent, an attack on my authority, on the very stability of this keep. Tonight, the traitor came to admire his work." His silver eyes bored into Valerius. He did not count on Lady Alara. All eyes swung to Alara. She stood her ground, her chin high. She held up the small leather pouch. "This was dropped by the afflicted guard," she announced, her voice clear and steady, carrying through the cavernous hall. "It contains the poison." Valerius laughed, a high, brittle sound. "And what does that prove? The word of a hollow girl against mine? She has no sense of smell. She could have found that anywhere." "But I do," Alara said calmly. She looked not at Valerius, but at the other lords. "I have a sense of reason. I have been reviewing the castle ledgers. For the past 2 months, Lord Valerius, your household has requisitioned large amounts of moon petal, silver root, and ghost orchid. The healer can confirm these are the primary components of scent-based alchemy. Alone, they are harmless. Combined." She let the sentence hang in the air. Valerius's face went pale. "Lies. She is a witch, whispering poison in your ear, Theron. Can't you see? She has enchanted you." "The only poison here is yours, Valerius," Theron stated, his patience clearly gone. "You sought to create chaos, to make me look weak and unable to protect my own. You would have my throne." "It is my right. More my right than to let the northern clans be ruled by a king who consorts with a scentless freak." Valerius spat, his fear finally giving way to venomous rage. He lunged, not at Theron, but at Alara, a dagger suddenly appearing in his hand. "I'll undo your mistake for you, cousin." He never reached her. Theron moved in a blur of gray fur and silver rage. The shift was instantaneous, a violent, explosive transformation from man to wolf. One moment, he was the king. The next, he was a massive, dire wolf, larger than any man, with fur the color of storm clouds and eyes like molten silver. A collective gasp went through the hall. The king had not taken his war form within the castle walls in a decade. The great wolf that was Theron met Valerius's charge with a guttural snarl that shook the very stones. The dagger clattered uselessly to the floor. The wolf's massive jaws closed on Valerius's shoulder, not with the intent to kill, but to utterly dominate. A scream of pain and terror was ripped from the lord's throat before he was thrown across the hall like a child's toy, landing in a crumpled heap at the feet of his horrified allies. The wolf padded silently to where Alara stood, her own shock holding her immobile. He stopped before her, his massive head level with her waist. He was the incarnation of primal power, of untamed royalty, and every instinct should have screamed for her to run. But Alara did not move. She looked into those intelligent silver eyes and saw not a beast, but Theron, her king, the man who had seen her when no one else had. Slowly, she reached out a trembling hand and laid it on the thick fur of his neck. The wolf leaned into her touch, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. It was not a growl of aggression, but of something else entirely, a sound of possession, of homecoming. In front of the entire court, the alpha of alphas, in his most terrifying form, bowed his head to the hollow one. And in that moment, everyone in the hall understood. She was not his ward. She was not his advisor. She was his. Chapter 4. The silence in the great hall was absolute, thick with the weight of revelation. The nobles of the northern clans, who had witnessed executions, bloody feuds, and declarations of war within these walls, had never seen anything like this. Their king, in the full, terrifying majesty of his war form, was submitting to the touch of the woman they had dismissed as a phantom. Theron, the wolf, held his position for a long, deliberate moment, letting the image burn itself into the memory of every soul present. He was marking his territory, and Alara was its center. Then, with a final, almost gentle nudge of his head against her hand, he turned his attention back to the whimpering form of Lord Valerius. With a fluid grace that belied his size, he shifted back. The transformation was less violent this time, a melting of forms from wolf to man. He stood naked for a moment, his body lean and corded with the muscle of a warrior, before Kale silently appeared at his side and draped a heavy fur cloak over his shoulders. Theron strode to his cousin, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face a mess of terror and disbelief. The king looked down at him, not with rage, but with a cold, final contempt. "You are stripped of your title and your lands," Theron declared, his voice resonating with royal authority. "You will be exiled to the Frostfang Isles. You will live out your days alone, with only your ambition to keep you warm. It will be a cold comfort." He looked at the guards. "Take him to the dungeons. He leaves on the morning tide." Valerius's former allies shrank back, avoiding his pleading gaze as he was hauled away, his cries for mercy echoing and then fading. The judgment was passed. The threat was neutralized. Theron turned back to the hall, his gaze sweeping over the pale, shocked faces of his court. "Let this be a lesson," he said, his voice ringing with power. "Lady Alara is under my personal protection. She speaks with my voice. She acts with my authority. An insult to her is an insult to the crown. A threat to her is a threat to me. There will be no more misunderstandings on this matter." His eyes finally came to rest on Alara. The hardness in them softened, replaced by that same intense, unreadable emotion she had seen on the battlement. He walked back to her, ignoring the rest of his court as if they were nothing more than tapestries on the wall. He stopped before her. "They see you now," he said softly. "They see your power," she corrected, her voice barely a whisper. "They see what you are." "No," he insisted, his silver eyes holding hers.